where do we come from? And where are we going?
Welcome. This is Red Eyes Radio.
Welcome, this is Red Eyes Radio. I'm your host, Henrik Palmgren, coming to you from the west coast of Sweden. Today we're joined by Webster Tarpley, and we got an awesome show on Webster's 9/11 research lined up for you. So do stay tuned for that, and later on for our subscribers, we're going to talk about the Venetians, or the Anglo-Venetian Whig faction, as Webster called it. A very interesting part of his research. I also want to thank Michael Horn for being with us last week for an awesome show. Also, of course, do check out our websites if you're new to the show. It's red-ice.net, and coming soon is redicecreations.com with our subscriber section. Alright, so let's listen to today's show. Welcome everyone, we got an awesome show lined up for you today. It's an honor to have Webster Griffin Tarpley on the line today. I'm very excited about this show. Webster has been a huge part of what I guess is referred to as the 9/11 Truth Movement, and I think most of our listeners and visitors to the Red Eyes website have heard of Webster before. He is the author to several books, including 9/11 Synthetic Terror, the unauthorized biography of George Bush, and also Against Oligarchy. If you want to check out Webster's site, it is tarpley.net. That's TARPLEY.net. And you'll find much more information there about his book, The Unauthorized Biography of George Bush. And basically the best way to get his books is through Amazon.com. Webster also got his own radio show through the Republic Broadcasting Network. That's rbnlive.com. It's up there every Saturday, so do check that out too. And, I haven't done a decent show on 9/11 yet on Red Ice Radio, and I really wanted to dig into this topic together with Webster. He's done some superb research on this, and he also has a very interesting background in researching a few areas that I think is quite unique. It's about the Venetian connection, and I've heard Webster refer to it as the Anglo-Venetian Whig faction, and this is a very important connection, I think, and sometimes it's overlooked. And we'll get into this area more in our subscriber interview later on. But I want to begin today to talk about 9/11 and what happened that day, and maybe more about the politics behind it, and so forth. So, well, that's enough for me, I think. Let's bring on our guest. Welcome to Red Ice Radio, Webster, and thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
I'm glad to be able to talk to all my friends in Sweden once again.
Excellent. Yeah, it's great to have you here, and I thought, if you want to, right at the top here, beginning, if you want to just share a little bit about your background for those that might not be familiar with you or your work.
Well, I guess I come from a background as a historian and also somebody who has studied secret intelligence matters, that is, the behavior of intelligence agencies over the past 400 to 500 or 600 years, which is, I think, the relevant kind of framework you need to have, and therefore I come to conclusions that are possibly more categorical, that is, they're clearer, I think they're easier to understand than a lot of people who write about September 11th. I started studying terrorism, not because I really wanted to, but because I was compelled to, as I was a correspondent, a journalist in Central Europe in the 1970s, living in Italy and then in Germany. So I was confronted with the existence of the Italian Red Brigades, the Moro assassination, and many other assassinations, and then the Baader-Meinhof group, the so-called Red Army faction in Germany. And I studied both of these, in particular the Italian side, but the German one too. And I do have a book that I basically directed in 1978, which was it was really commissioned by a member of the Italian government, a guy called Zamberletti, who came to me and said, why don't you do a study of the behavior of the mass media during the 1978 kidnapping and murder of the former Prime Minister, Aldo Moro.
Yeah.
And I wrote a large parts of a book, and others, friends of mine, contributed to it also. And the finding that we had was that Moro had been kidnapped and murdered by NATO intelligence, and that this was connected somehow to the warnings that had been delivered by Henry Kissinger to Moro. And remember that Moro's great project was to bring the Italian Communist Party, in reality a very timid social democratic party by any measure, into the government, but to give the country a stable government and a stable majority, which the U.S. and the British simply did not want. And Kissinger had threatened, as it turned out after this book was published, Kissinger was then revealed to have threatened Moro by his widow. Moro's widow came forward and said, Kissinger threatened my husband that if he persisted in the design of bringing the communists into the government, then there would be a very bad consequence for him. And this is, of course, what happened. So my interpretation of both the Italian Red Brigades and similar things in Italy, as well as the German Baader-Meinhof group, is that these are examples of NATO intelligence. In other words, U.S., British-dominated NATO intelligence, and I would classify them as spheres of influence or geopolitical terrorism. They're a kind of terrorism that was designed to maintain the artificial division of Europe along the Yalta lines of demarcation when you had very strong nationalistic impulses in these countries, which the U.S. and the British wanted to suffocate, and they did it using terrorism, and they succeeded. They kept their empire intact, so to speak, long after it would have been historically obsolete. So when you get to something like September 11th, it's obviously imperative to look at it in exactly the same way, because that's what it is. It is another example of U.S., British geopolitical terrorism. I had also done some work in the meantime, which included a great deal of attention to Iran-Contra, the Iran-Contra gun running and drug running in the United States in the late 1980s, where you had lots of people, Senator Inouye of the United States Senate, talking about an invisible government, a parallel government, a secret team, a rogue network in the institutions, doing what it wanted to do, quite apart from the laws or the legally constituted government. And this, of course, was true. And then I found, as I went on, after having written about that, I got to the point in 1992 of writing the unauthorized biography of George Bush the Elder. And this also focused on the fact that George Bush the Elder had been the mastermind of, he had been at least one of the main organizers of this entire process of gun running and drug running into Central America, but also the Middle East and indeed the Baltic. It was a scandal that, as you know, reached into Sweden with the Olof Palme assassination is somehow connected to this. The death of a distinguished admiral who was found, he was pitched under the wheels of a subway train in downtown Stockholm back in the mid to late 80s. All of this had to do with the far-flung tentacles of this gun running and drug running that went on. So I had studied this stuff, and therefore I was therefore the author of the unauthorized biography of George Bush the Elder in 1992. That still stands as really the only critical unauthorized biography of Bush the Elder. And I'm glad to say that book, for people who are interested, is on the Internet and has been for 10 years. You can get this at tarpley.net. It's been up there as of October, as of this month. It's 10 years, because it was precisely in October 1996 in the presidential election of that year. Remember, it was Clinton against Dole. It seemed important to put that up on the Internet, and it's been there ever since for free. You can download the entire book and read it, and I urge people to do so. But I urge them to go to Amazon.com and get the printed book, which is easier to read.
Yeah, of course. So Webster, obviously you have a huge background on these kinds of things, and as you say that these to study 9/11, of course, obviously to you it's just a continuation basically of the same strategy here, but for someone who have no idea or basically no opinion about the 9/11 on what happened on that day and so forth, and perhaps some of the motives. I mean, what are some of the key elements here that you think that we should, get across to people who haven't, heard about these alternative theories, so to speak?
Well, there are a number of ways to approach it. A lot of people approach it through a kind of a bottom-up technical approach, which is to try to take each episode of 9/11, the collapse of the Twin Towers, the planes crashing into the buildings, the collapse of Building 7, the mysterious flying object hitting the Pentagon, we think at least, the crash of the plane in Shanksville. And you can, of course, demolish every one of those in terms of the official version. And when I say the official version, I mean, of course, the widely discredited Kane, Hamilton, Zelikow Commission report delivered in July of 2004, which is now shot full of holes from any number of points of view. But what I recommend is look at it from the top. In other words, start from the idea we know what the world is. In other words, we know what are the main intelligence agencies in the world. And if you look at it this way, you'll see that the entire thing can be explained within relatively few minutes. In other words, you see 9/11, and as I did on that day, I happened to be in Berlin, Germany. I was not therefore getting the great American television brainwash. That was probably an advantage for me. But when you look at something like this, you say, first of all right, this is a huge intelligence operation. It requires hundreds and hundreds of people, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. And the first question is, who in the world can do that? What are the intelligence agencies that have the capability of putting on a spectacular act of international terrorism on that scale with that degree of coordination? And remember, it's going to imply headquarters, most likely in a private military firm, with any number of probably 100 officers sitting at consoles and coordinating the various aspects of this thing. So you have to ask yourself, who could do it? Well, the United States could do it. The British could do it. The Russians could do it. The French could do it. The Mossad could do it. And if it had taken place in some other countries, it could have been those countries. If it had happened in China, it might have been China, or Japan, or something like this. But since it happened in the United States, and since you have these egregious phenomena, and the very clear things like the total suppression of air defense for 1 hour and 50 minutes, or thereabouts, 1 hour to 45 to 50 minutes, it's clear that the only force that can carry this out is a faction of the United States command structure itself. There simply is no other explanation because of the scale, the coordination, the complication, and the fact that you've got things going on that only a government could do, resources employed that only a government has. It's therefore, we can eliminate all the other contenders and say that this is a piece of handiwork of the excuse me.
Yes, no problem.
Of the United States regime itself.
The
United States regime itself. And if you then delve into it, after a while, it also becomes clear that the British, as usual, because of this sort of Siamese twin relation between the British and the United States, who have comprehensive sharing agreements, the relation of Fort Meade, Maryland, to Aldermaston in England in terms of signals intelligence and things like this. It's clear that the British also play a role. So what you get down to is, therefore, this has got